G'day guys, and welcome to this business management lesson. In today's lesson, we're looking at key knowledge point 132. That is Unit 1, Area of Study 3, and the second key knowledge point for this area of study. Today specifically, we're looking at an overview of the key legal and government regulations affecting businesses during the planning stage. This is the first of a few key knowledge points from this area of study that specifically deal with factors from the macro operating environment of businesses that affect business planning. Now, when it comes to key legal and government regulations, we're really talking about the law. What can you do according to the law? And much, much more importantly than what you can do, what are you not allowed to do? And what must you do according to the law? As far as business activities are concerned, these are very heavily regulated by laws made in 3 different jurisdictions in Australia. The local government level, that might be your council, who will have rules about noise and about zoning, whether you can conduct certain types of businesses in certain addresses within their territory. State governments pass laws around business hours, liquor licensing, and permits that are subject to the state government. And then certainly the federal government passes laws about international trade and tax legislation and that sort of thing. If you run a business, you're going to have to pay attention to the laws that affect your business from 3 different levels of government. Now, when it comes to initial business planning, there are some regulations that apply to all businesses. And if you've been with us all the way through Unit 1, you might remember a couple of these things from the earlier areas of study. One thing that applies to all businesses is every business must register their business name with ASIC, the Australian Securities and Investment Commission. Of course, there is one exception: a sole trader who is trading under their own given name on their birth certificate or on their naming documentation can just use their own name. But if you're talking about a partnership or any type of company, or even a sole trader who would prefer to use a business name other than their own name, they must register their business name. Another thing that all businesses must do to conduct commercial activity in Australia is they must register for an Australian business number, or ABN, and that can be seen on businesses' invoices and receipts. And certainly every business that is going to conduct any type of commercial activity that is in a legally controlled sector needs to apply for licenses or permits to enable them, to permit them to conduct those business activities. So some examples are, if you're going to have people driving forklifts or diggers or steamrollers for your business, you have to be licensed and permitted to do that. If you're going to be dealing with hazardous wastes or radioactive waste, you need to be licensed and permitted to do that. If you'll be serving alcohol, keeping or breeding animals, handling food, your business needs to be licensed and permitted to undertake those activities. Now, another thing that every business needs to pay attention to is its taxation arrangements. Pretty much every business is going to end up paying tax in one form or another. Certainly every employee needs to pay income tax. Every business is likely to engage in some buying or selling of goods, and they'll probably need to pay GST on the purchase or sale of certain goods. And every business needs to report their earnings to the Australian Tax Office, the ATO, and many businesses are required to do this quarterly through quarterly reports called business activity statements, or BAS. When it comes to having employees within your business or workers within your business, which would include you, even if it's your own business, Victoria has its own set of OH&S legislation, but even at the federal level, there's OH&S legislation, or occupational health and safety legislation, that applies to workers in every context in Australia. Essentially, these laws are designed to ensure that employees, when they go to work, are able to leave work and go home in the same physical and mental condition that they arrived in, that they are able to reasonably expect that they will go home without having sustained an injury to either their physical health or their mental health. Just to show you, and you don't need to memorize any of this, but I just want to show you all that when we're talking about legislation like OH&S, this is a heavily controlled area. There are several different acts, and this is not an exhaustive list, but it's just a sample of the different acts passed by different levels of Australian government to do with occupational health and safety, or that affect the area of occupational health and safety. And if the acts weren't enough, there are also a number of relevant regulations which expand on and fill the gaps between the acts when it comes to occupational health and safety. So certainly if you are a business that works with explosives of any kind, you would have to pay particular attention to the requirements of the Dangerous Goods Explosives regulations from 2011. And of course, if you're conducting commercial activity, you probably have competition and customers or consumers, in which case you need to be aware of the requirements of the Competition and Consumer Act 2010, or CCA, which is enforced and compliance is monitored by the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, or the ACCC. Essentially, they're the business cops to ensure that businesses aren't ripping off their customers or dealing with their competitors in unfair and unlawful ways. And furthermore, if that wasn't enough, if you have any impact on the environment, which if you conduct a business, you probably do, there are more legislation involved in environmental considerations. So how you manage your rubbish, how you dispose of waste, whether or not you're permitted to undertake business activity in certain sites and certain regions. This legislation is designed to protect endangered animals. So builders will have to have an environmental survey, a land survey to detect if there are any at-risk plants or animals, flora or fauna in the area before they conduct building activities. Certainly noise pollution, light pollution, pollution. You're not allowed to just dump rubbish into a river. Whatever it is, if you have an impact on the environment, there is laws covering what you can, cannot, and must do in different ways. Now, if you're going to start your own business, and there are all these different laws that might apply to you in your business, it can be kind of overwhelming. You don't want to find that you suddenly owe some government department a fine of thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. You don't want to face charges and potential prison time because you broke laws that you weren't aware of. And the government understands this. The government, generally speaking, wants there to be a huge number of successful businesses within the economic region of Australia because it helps create jobs. It helps ensure that there is economic productivity in Australia, which helps support the economy. And they understand that the law is a tricky thing. So the Australian Business Licence and Information Service, ABLIS, is a free service that you can access right now. If you pause this video and type ABLIS into Google, it's going to come up. It looks just like this. And basically, you can go through the guided search or you can find a specific form. And particularly if you go through the guided search, you'll answer a number of true or false questions, a couple of tick boxes, a couple of choose from the list about what kind of business you intend to run. You give it all the information, you tell it where you're going to run your business, and then it will pump out a list of all of the legislative requirements that you might need to consider for your business. And it's very, very accurate. It's very good. It's very easy to use. The language is very simple to understand. Certainly one of the activities my students will be doing is using ABLIS to look up the legislative requirements for a business that they are proposing to run. And I encourage you all to go and have a play with ABLIS just to look at the different kinds of legislative requirements it spits back at you when you enter in your business idea or the details of a business you're familiar with. In summary for this key knowledge point, many areas of business activity are subject to laws, and those laws will dictate things that you can do, things that you cannot do, and things that you absolutely must do. Not all businesses are going to be subject to the same laws. For example, the zoo is going to have a lot more legislative requirements around animal handling than a shoe shop would have, and a shoe shop is going to have more ACCC related competition and consumer related legislative requirements than perhaps the zoo might have. It is a responsibility of any business manager to be aware of the legislative requirements that apply to their business and compliant with the legislative requirements that apply to their business, because failure to comply with legislation is not only unethical, it's going to introduce you or expose you to potential penalties that will be barriers to the achievement of your business objectives. It's really hard to make a profit if you're constantly paying your revenue in fines to the government, and it's really hard to achieve business objectives if you're locked up in prison for being criminally negligent where it came to OH&S legislation or something like that. That's all for today. See you next time.